Okay, I'm here with Sean Skipworth. He is the current mayor of Dickinson, Texas, which is maybe about 25 minutes outside of Alvin. Sean, how's it going?
Doing all right. Thanks for having me on.
All right. So, Mayor, you are the mayor. Let me just give the overview. You're the mayor of Dickinson. What else? What else is your official positions?
So I work full time at College of the Mainland down the road. Also, I teach here part time as well as an adjunct occasionally. So technically an employee here too, and I adjunct for a few other colleges as well here and there, just online though, really.
Okay, so you're mayor of Dickinson, and another reason why. So I want to talk to you a lot about what that entails and how you got there and everything. Also, I hear that there was some controversy. I've heard all sorts of rumors, controversy even leading up to national politics. Is that true?
Maybe to some degree, I guess. Yeah. I don't know how crazy it's gotten, but sure.
Okay, but there's definitely local issues, and people
Sure.
are upset about stuff. But let me just start off. Let's start off small. Give me the basics of when did you become mayor, and what made you run?
So my foray really into politics in Dickinson was in 2019. I ran for council and I got elected. I defeated an incumbent and got elected. May. I think there was a runoff, so it was June of 19. So I was on city council for that the rest of that year, of course. And then in 2020, the longtime mayor said that she wasn't going to run again, and I decided to run for mayor at that point. That was the COVID year, and so we're supposed to have May elections in Dickinson, but we didn't, and so the elections went on until November. Things started off interestingly right off the bat. It was probably a harbinger of things to come. So we ended up, it's a 4-person race. I'm second out of 4, but nobody gets a majority, so it goes to a runoff with the top 2 vote getters. And after all is said and done in December, it ends up being a tie with the total amount of votes equaling 2020. So we each had 1,010 votes.
Oh, wow.
State law says that in an event of a tie like that, some random method is used to resolve the tie. So on January the 7th, 2021, we drew the mayor of Friendswood drew a ping pong ball out of a hat. How did that happen? I was the winner.
But it was a ping pong ball out of the hat?
Yeah, so we each wrote our name on a ping pong ball and we put them into a hat. And the mayor of Friendswood came over and he put his hand in. And
now, how does the mayor of Friendswood come into this?
The former mayor, who was still having to oversee all of this, knows him, and he was someone that doesn't have no dog in that hunt. So everyone's going to accuse him of having a ping pong ball up his sleeve, and swapping it out. So he did that. And you mentioned national politics. It was interesting because January 6th, 2021, we're still hearing a lot about that because that was the day that there was the riot or whatever you want to call it on Capitol Hill, and there was all this stuff. And so when this ball drawing happened, the local press covered it quite a bit because it was sort of a quirky story.
Yeah.
And they were asking me questions in the aftermath, like, considering what happened yesterday, what do you think this means today? And I said, well, I think that people can just move on peacefully with whatever happens. And it was just interesting that there was that parallel was made, which took me a little by surprise when they asked. I'm like, why are you asking me about presidential election? I was like, oh, well, I see where you're coming from. So that was interesting. The New York Times interviewed me, and there was a piece there, and I had that was probably the first 15 minutes of national fame. It would not end up being the last.
Yeah.
Well,
anyway. that's pretty quirky. It's a pretty funny story. So I am a resident of Dickinson, and I did not vote in the runoff.
Well, it's your fault, one way or the other. It's either you subjected me to this, or you could have spared me from it, wherever you would have voted. But
now, what was that scene like? I mean, were there a lot of people in the room?
There was an overflow outside in the lobby. They had to enforce the fire marshal number. There was a lot of people there. It was standing room only, and I showed up and. I think I still have a screenshot on my phone. I had like 100-something text messages right after it happened because people were. The city streamed it. I think it was live, and then it was covered on the news. And my dad was like, "I saw you on the Associated Press website," and sent me this article. It's got me holding this ball up, and so it was pretty wild. Pretty wild. So
now, but going into this election, what were the issues?
So back in 2020, when you have a longtime mayor, she's been the mayor for 15 years. So obviously you're going to have now that she's leaving, voluntarily, how are things going to be different? Of course, the pandemic was going on, and so that made campaigning really, really strange.
Yeah.
But a lot of the major issues were the stuff you see in any local town, flooding, like flood control, especially living on the coast.
Okay.
Roads, maintenance, economic development so we're a small town in a metro area. In some ways, probably not too dissimilar from maybe in Alvin, the stuff you'd hear. We want the roads fixed. We want this fixed. We want more places to eat in town.
We need more car washes, I think.
But yeah, there was that as well. So you end up, it was nothing that you wouldn't expect in a small town. That was essentially the gist of it.
Now, was there a big policy differences between you and your primary?
No, in fact, I'd say a lot of people had said that they were, they liked both of us. They were going to vote for either of us. There was definitely a segment of that. I would say that election, it wasn't really nasty between the two of us. I mean, the ball drawing happens. We hugged each other, and she saw me after I was mayor, and we had her on some committees. She was actually on the hiring committee to hire a city manager, and I had asked her to be on there. So it wasn't, at that point, it's some of the normal stuff where you get the fur flies a little bit, and you both a little tense because you're competing for the same office. But certainly nothing got to a level of probably what I'll end up describing here later on. It was all very, very civil, all within kind of the normal bounds of an electoral campaign.
I think I would need to use a teaser trailer for the beginning of this podcast to jump forward, because there's going to be contentious issues coming down the pipeline. I deliberately, I like how I can justify this. I deliberately didn't research because I wanted to sort of get, your the main idea from there. I think I lost video. Hold on a sec. Oh, it's all on you now. Don't worry.
It's all on me. my foot just touched a cord.
You know what? That is my fault. We're gonna fix this live.
Okay. That was me.
That is this thing.
All right, I'm here to assist. What can I do?
Yeah,
okay, here we go.
I should have known better than to do a new configuration.
I fidget too much.
I should have assumed that was a possibility, and hopefully my feed. But who cares? It's not.
They don't only want to look at me anyway.
Yeah. they got a blurry image of me. So okay. So now, what about the city council makeup? Was that the city council? Was it the same composition as before?
So that was we have a 7-member council if you count the mayor, and so there were 4 seats up. One person was running unopposed. So the council changed. Really, I'm actually trying to remember. I was new, and we had one other person who replaced an incumbent who didn't seek re-election. And other than that, the council had stayed the same as the people who'd been on it when I was, first on in 19. We'd had one seat swapped out, but it was otherwise the same.
Now,
I'm sorry, 2 seats because I ran. My seat was vacant because I was on council.
Oh, that's right.
So there was 2 new people. Yeah.
Okay. And what was sort of your relationship with the people with the city council?
I mean, it kind of varied. A couple people were supportive, allies. Other people were not supportive. One council member, I was told when the ball drawing happened and I won, he stormed out very angrily. And 2 of the council members who supported me kind of stopped him and said, "What's wrong? Where are you going?" And actually, he was so tickled by it, this other council member, he stopped me in the aftermath and he said, you wouldn't believe what just happened. And he, told me this other guy had stormed out angrily, that my name got drawn. So
one of the council members was upset?
One of the current ones who did not, he didn't support me when I ran in 2019. He didn't support me for mayor.
Well, what's the point of contention?
That's a good question. I guess I ran against someone he supported in 19 and he didn't support me then. I mean, we never talked a lot about policy differences, and I'd say on a lot of stuff we even voted the same. But I couldn't tell you. It's a small town, and sometimes that stuff comes in, and I'm an outsider, and I went from there, and so and just kind of knew we probably weren't going to. I'd say we didn't get along, but we. Clearly, there was a view we didn't see the world in the same way. So he was apparently not pleased that I had won.
Okay.
So there.
All right. So so that's some warning signs there. So all right. So you become mayor. When do you take office? When did you take office?
So pretty much right after that. So then I think the first council meeting of the year was after that. Probably on Tuesday the next week. So it was shortly thereafter.
Oh wow!
I was sworn in. We had the meeting and all of that. I mean, I'd been on council, and so there wasn't as much of a learning curve. I sort of already knew what was going on.
Oh, that's good.
So it was pretty quick after that. But given the election should have happened in May, and it didn't. And so then it should have been resolved in November, but it wasn't. So then it should have been resolved in December, but it still wasn't because it was a tie. So we had to go through all the holidays. We didn't really resolve it till the first of the year. So it definitely it was a long 9 months, longer than it should have been, something like that.
Yeah.
So it took a while.
So so what was the first few months being in office like?
So really, it was pretty calm. I mean, we had the city manager had separated from the city, so we had an interim, and we were starting the search committee for a permanent city manager. And
the city manager left. Was this on good terms, or?
So it had been, there had been some animosity with him in the council before, in the community, and there was some controversy, and he had actually been embroiled in a child abuse allegations, and really kind of in the middle of that campaign, I think it was October, November-ish, he ended up getting charged formally, and at that point we terminated him. We gave him some money just to kind of put the thing to bed, and he got out of there. But
should we be saying names, or I mean, it sounds fair.
I mean, everybody can look this stuff up. It's not really but I'm not intentionally avoiding using names for any reason. But,
I mean, this is all public, and anyone who hears, they're going to want to look. And all right, what's the name?
Chris Hurd was the city manager when I got elected, and it was on the paper, and all of this went on, and so he ended up moving on and paid him, and that was actually while the runoff was not resolved, so it was sort of between the November election and the December election. So.
All right, just really quick, what does a city manager do? So
in our form of government, which is aside from the big cities, you typically see this, not always in Texas, is that the mayor, contrary to popular belief, is not like the president of the city. They don't run the city. I would think of them to some degree as your first among equals on city council. So you, by law, you run the meetings, you run the chamber. So, you do have the perks of being the chair, running the meetings, things like that, right?
The mayor does. The mayor
does. And depending on your system, mayors might set the agenda for the meetings, but that isn't actually the case in ours. Even in a council manager position, a mayor may do that. So, from that standpoint, that's your kind of where you're at now. If there's an emergency, natural disaster or something, then if you declare an emergency and there's other declarations from state officials, then you do kind of become the on the ground. It's literally martial law, so you actually have powers to give direct direction. You can spend money without approval during an emergency, things like that. So that's when you're really the most separate. But and all that is true in a council manager system. Usually the mayor's not that powerful. However, there's a difference in that the average public doesn't see it that way. So you're the mayor. So a lot of people assume you get a full-time salary. You don't. I work my job at College of the Mainland is a full-time job because I have to get paid. They think that you have a lot of arbitrary executive power, which you don't have. And so people come to you, you become the most visible, and certainly members of council get emails and stuff about issues. I can attest as someone that was on council and a mayor, you get vastly more requests and outreach from people than you did before because you're the mayor. And you're seen as you're the president of the city is how people view it. And so that's what they do.
What are the biggest powers of mayor?
Really, I'd say in a disaster, particularly powerful. We had 2 major situations. I think I declared a state of emergency 3 times during my time as mayor. The first one was right after I came into office during the freeze. That was sort of a trial by fire.
I see.
I'd been in office less than a month, I think, and so it was this bizarre natural disaster nobody had ever really encountered. And so I was on point for that right away. During Nicholas, we declared a disaster, and then recently during Beryl, we declared a disaster. So I drove through a hurricane down to the police department. And we were there and getting status on what's going on, making sure things are dealt with, giving direction to staff, working with people. So it's certainly in a disaster year particularly important. But a lot of it is, I think, just whether you have the formal powers commiserate with what people think you do, you are seen as a leader. You are seen as that, and so you have to exercise those roles. So you help to guide an agenda, to talk about what you'd like to do, and you've got to get counsel to agree and work with the staff. So it's kind of weird. There's all the expectations on you to do things as if you had a lot of power, but you actually don't have that power. So you have to be, I'd say, savvy in how you deal with problems and people and get what you'd like, because you don't have the power to make people do what you want them to do. You can't do that.
I guess you have symbolic power, or maybe bully pulpit to whatever
I
degree.
teach this in class. You talk about in political science a new stat, and he wrote that seminal book, Presidential Power, and he says that even a president who does have power, that they have to exercise a power of persuasion, that you cannot just give orders and people, even then as the president, they don't do what you want. They certainly aren't going to do it as a mayor. You're just not that, you don't have that power, and so you have to be able to convince people, go to the public, do things like that to get people on your side. So it requires those soft skills.
And the city manager, that's a full-time position?
The city manager, the way to look at it is the city council is the board of directors and the company, and the city manager is the CEO. So we have one employee that we directly hire and fire, the city manager. The police chief, the city secretary are selected by the city manager with our ratification as a council as a whole. But the city manager is the only, and the city attorney. But other than those are the only ones that we hire and fire directly.
Okay. All right. So with that background, I just heard that there's some controversy, or there was some controversy or whatever. Walk me through maybe chronologically, like what were the warning signs, and then what happened?
So really, I'd say the first, I got sworn in January that year. Things were pretty calm through most of that year. We hired a full-time city manager in the summer, Theo Melanson, and he's still the city manager now. And really his mandate was come in, get City Hall modernized, things like that. I'll give you an example. When I came onto council, one of the first things I asked was, I said, so what are employee evaluations like? And I was told, we don't really do that. Like at all. Like it had been years since we had done employee evaluations.
Oh, wow.
So we didn't do that. And so that gives you an example, I think, of just some of the modernization stuff. A lot of the systems were still pen and paper, things like that. And so he really had a mandate from council to come in and make some of these changes. So he comes in and is doing a really good job. He's working on things and hitting the ground running and trying to, shaking up staff and stuff like that and getting stuff done. And he had a real background in economic development, and that was a big thing that we were trying to work on. And so really things were good then. I'd say, one other thing I'll note. So right as he gets hired, we have a council member who passes away. His name was Scott Apley, and he was a council member who got elected in the same cycle I did, and he was a member of the GOP state committee. So he was one of the 2 reps from our Senate district that served on the party committee. We actually, I think, got along pretty well when we would talk. We didn't always see things eye to eye, but he would sit down with me and we'd try to work things out or have compromises to bring up later, and so that was constructive. He passed away and died from COVID. Oh, wow. And he had made some comments on social media that many people branded as inflammatory. I can't recall the exact words, but he had said doctors were the enemy of a free people or something. And so, it was really at the height of a lot of the conflict over over COVID vaccines and mask wearing and doctors.
Oh, okay. Wow.
So it was ground zero for that. And so he had made some of these comments, and I was really unaware of any of those comments until after he passed away.
Mm-hmm.
Well, given he made them on Twitter, I think. And so when I remember his wife had told me that, he wasn't doing well, and he really, it was very sad. He declined pretty rapidly, and he passed away, I think, just a few days after he'd really started to show symptoms. And so when he passed away, my mother raised me right. And so I went on to social media, I made a post, and I said, I'm sorry to say that, Councilman Appley's passed away, and our hearts are really broken, and he's had a wife and a young child, and this is all very sad. So I then became embroiled in the national spotlight again because this story got picked up. I was in the Daily Beast, and they they used my post. I had people sending me text messages saying that I'm a right-wing hack who doesn't believe in vaccinations, and I said, well, I said I'm sorry that he passed away, and that became that I think I agree with him in everything that he said.
I see.
The city manager had been city manager a week after this happened. We were getting calls to City Hall. We received calls from people from England using the C word to describe people. A birthday card, a congratulations card got delivered to me that it said, congratulations, basically that he's stupid and died from COVID, and we're all really happy about that.
I see.
We were getting all of this stuff. I got interviewed by the Washington Post, so now I've done the New York Times and the Washington Post as the mayor of a town of 20,000 people, which was not on my bingo card. It's not what I expected. And it was about this, and I had said at the time, I go, I don't agree with the things that he said. I said, I never encountered him acting like that. Mm-hmm. And even if you really have a problem with, anti-vaccine rhetoric, is this how you're going to do it? You're going to have a victory lap because this guy died who didn't believe in vaccines? I mean, who are you converting with this? And I was very critical of the people that were beating him up, and I ended up deleting my post off Facebook, which I think technically is not allowed. You're supposed to maintain a record.
Oh, it's a record.
But it was so bad. They were bashing this man and his family and saying horrible things, and I kind of said, I don't, I guess sue me if you want, put me in jail. I took it down. It was bad.
Were these commenters, were they mostly local? Were there people?
No, it was not local. It was all over the country. So this had become a national thing. Once it hit the Daily Beast and people saw it, and that's obviously more of a liberal publication, right? So you had that kind of tide of folks were being real, pretty hateful about it and sort of lording it up that he had died. So sort of right away, the city manager comes in, and this poor guy, like immediately, there's this ground zero of this controversy, and so he's being asked stuff or on the phone, and he's fielding questions, and so it was interesting. Later, I'd be called the left-wing hack, but that day I was the right-wing hack. So,
okay. Well, I guess he must have been one of the maybe first outspoken politicians. Anti-vaxxer who dies of COVID, and so I guess that's the story kind of writes itself in terms of something that's going to get a lot of clicks and attention.
I definitely see the relevance of why the story was reported. I mean, I get it, but it was so ugly, and people acted so ugly. And
what year? 2021.
21, would have been in the summer of 21. Yeah.
Okay, well, that seems kind of late into the whole game. I mean, it's fading from memory, the whole COVID thing, but so lockdown was in early 2020. Mm-hmm. So this is
vaccines were like March-ish, I think, of 21.
So vaccines already, vaccines hit, and then summer. So that's interesting that it would explode kind of late.
There had been I think it was because there'd been a few people at that point that had been very vocal, opponents of vaccinations or critical of vaccinations, and they died or got sick, and then of course this gets reported saying, see, look, you should have got your vaccination. And I think that the reason it was late was because vaccinations had not been around for too long, so there was nothing to. In 2020, you couldn't say I'm against vaccinations because they weren't readily available. Yeah,
it would be against lockdown and masks.
Yeah, that was one thing. But then, later it became the hot button issue at that point was the vaccinations. Then I get why they ran the story, but it was really ugly. And kind of my quotes, it was them, and I think NBC News had interviewed me separate.
Wow.
We had someone from Washington Post was on our Zoom meeting for our council meeting because they were reporting on what we said. It was wild, and basically my comment was, this is not a time for a victory lap. I said if you're happy that this man died, like, you're not making anything better. That's not the way to act.
Yeah. If there's only some way to turn this attention to something positive, like come to one of our restaurants and
no, it certainly wasn't that way. I mean, my comment was, I said, I'm vaccinated, my wife's vaccinated. When they let kids get vaccinated, my kid will be vaccinated. I said, and I'm not up here telling you get vaccinated or else, but I think you should, and I'm asking you to do that. But at the same time, we can't vilify.
Yeah.
It's when somebody dies, whether you think their views are wrong or not, I don't think it's right to just crucify the person. That's not. There's a line of decency that I don't think should be crossed. And I can say I don't agree with what he said, but say deserves some dignity or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So, it's sad that we've come to this point where you've got to dance on people's graves and things like that.
And that'll be another harbinger of something to come to. That interestingly, it was a case where I think I was standing up for civility, and in this case, it was. Incivility was being directed at somebody else, right? And then it would end up turning my way pretty severely later.
Now, before we go there, what was during COVID and lockdown? As mayor, what could you do, or what sort of COVID-related policies could you do as mayor?
So during 2020, I wasn't the mayor; it was still the other mayor, and Texas policy had changed some during that too.
Oh yeah,
so
that's right.
I know the mayor at the time. We'd done what a lot of cities did, is the restaurants weren't open, everything was delivery. We did our Economic Development Corporation gave some local businesses money that were closed for various reasons to try to help them just keep stay afloat during the thing. We did that a little bit. I think it was like $7,000 a business or something.
Okay.
In 2021, when vaccinations were around, it was a little bit different. But we had a few public events we had to look at and find ways to say, are we going to hold this event? How are we going to hold it in a way that's not going to be like a super spreader event? So there's a little bit of that. But actually, shortly after I became mayor, the governor took away the power of mayors to do anything. So at that point, it really didn't matter what I would have thought or not. In fact, there was one event, and staff, I think, was a little hesitant to let it be held, and I still had the power if I wanted to not let it be held. And I really wasn't sure exactly. I really wanted to stay open, but then before I had to make a decision, the governor said, no, y'all can't make that decision anymore. So I said, well, I guess they can have it. I mean, so that's
spared you some trouble.
So,
I guess.
Hey, he did spare me having to make a call like that. And do I make the staff angry? He doesn't agree with it, or am I making the citizens angry? But that's not a call that I had to make. So really, I didn't have. By the time I was mayor, there wasn't much authority that we had over COVID, really anyway. So I kind of missed the boat on that one largely.
Did a lot of businesses in Dickinson basically die because of COVID?
So definitely we had a downturn in businesses, the restaurant industry in particular. And there were some businesses that I don't think made it after COVID, but it wasn't completely devastating. Or I put it this way, it wasn't worse than it was that I saw anywhere else in the country that had to deal with it. It was really a problem. Yeah, problem everywhere. Yeah. But especially that service industry, I think the food service industry, suffered pretty badly.
Yeah. But, I mean, I remember doing a lot of takeout during that period of time.
We had a local restaurant. My wife and I had our anniversary in 2020, and so they delivered, like rose petals and the steak and all this stuff. And we took a picture of it and put it on social media, saying, it's our anniversary. You can still order food. So we tried to do some, patriotic. That's great. Entrepreneurship. Promoting people. Be a patriot. Have them bring in your food during this. Keep local small business open. So we tried to do that as we could.
Yeah, no, my wife really likes your posts. She followed along and watched, you would go to different businesses and things like that. Yeah. So we thought that was good. Okay, so what after COVID then?
So, your initial question had been, when did things start to go bad? And so that story I told you about, Scott Apley and these problems, I took some heat for that, but local residents didn't really flip out about that. That was a national thing, a lot of ways, people outside of the city. But it was still ugly, right? It sort of gave you this the climate that we're getting into. And I think if you go look up those articles that I had done, I make some comments where I say I'm concerned for what does this mean. And I remember off the record, some of the reporters kind of lamented with me, like, I don't understand why people would say, I don't like what this guy said, so I'm going to be a jerk. And I'm going to do the thing I'm accusing him of doing. Anyway, so that in the December of that year, everything was going along well, and then there was a controversy involving our city manager where I think he was going to break up with his girlfriend who he was living with at the time in the city, and they had an argument, and he had she was blocking him from leaving a room, and he sort of took her and moved her to the side and leaves. And then unbeknownst to him, she calls the police, it becomes, there's accusation of a domestic violence incident and all this kind of stuff. But then very quickly after, she says, no, it wasn't a domestic violence incident. We had an argument. No, he didn't hurt me. I don't want you to press charges. And it became a big mess at that point. And so it was right after Christmas, I think between Christmas and New Year's, and so I'm told that this had happened, and so I go down to City Hall, and we're trying to figure this out. The city manager had actually gone out of town. He didn't even know she had called the police until the next day, the next morning.
Was he a Dickinson resident?
No, he was from out of, we'd hired him. It's pretty common for city managers to be kind of like the NFL with coaches and stuff. It's actually very similar to that, but... So, I talked to him some, and we ended up having our attorney, the law firm that represented the city, questioned his girlfriend and other people and took statements from her. And we had put him on administrative leave, and then counsel looked at the evidence, and she basically ended up saying, I was angry and I called the police, and I didn't, I regret that now, or whatever the case may have been. So we ended up reinstating him and letting him stay. And we said, well, all right, we'll see what happens. If you end up getting convicted or something, I think there was an understanding probably that we're gonna have to let you go. But you're innocent until proven guilty, so we'll see what happens. Ultimately, and the wheels of justice turn slowly. They end up just dropping the charges, and the complaining witness is not complaining, and all of this. And the city manager addressed it, I know, publicly a couple times. Houston Chronicle interview, other things, and he said, I regretted that this thing happened, but.
Now, how did you hear about this in the first place?
So staff told me the next morning, and it was it was the holidays right after Christmas. So I was at home and just hanging out, and was sleeping in late, and wake up the next morning and my phone is blown up, and I'm like, what the heck's going on? And I'm like, good grief. So I'm going up there, and it was definitely a pretty tense time, and but we end up ends up being we let him come back to work, just waiting to see what ends up coming of the case, and ultimately nothing ends up coming of the case, and it just kind of go. But this was not, he wasn't, even at the time, there was no accusation he was beating people or doing anything like that. It wasn't.
I'm just wondering, did he? So your staff found out, but how did they find out? Did he himself go to?
No, because like I said, he actually didn't know the police had been called. So he spent the night, I think, at a hotel or something, and was unaware that she had even called the police.
Yeah, but this is Houston PD, right?
I know it would have been. So it was in Dickinson.
Oh, it was in Dickinson. Okay, I see.
But he was actually unaware. I was just told the next morning that. I believe it was at the time the police chief had called me and said that this had happened.
Okay.
And ended up in the paper and other things, but by January he was back at work, and we just the evidence was just lacking. I think even the sheriff in the paper had made a comment about it not being a severe incident, or the accusation wasn't something like that. And so when we reinstated him, I remember I'd kind of read some prepared remarks, and I basically explained, like, here's why at least I'm voting to do this, and that was one of the reasons, is that that we're talking to her and she's saying that no, this isn't that way. And anyway, so it ends up comes back to work, and but I do feel like for some people that might have started a crack of I don't know what the word would be, of criticism, particularly towards him. Now, I skipped ahead a little bit because prior to that, also shortly after the city manager had come, we were in the midst of a large economic development deal over on what we call Water Street. And so it's this big piece of property up on I-45. And the city had owned the property for a while and had not really done anything with it. And so the months subsequent, we had been working on trying to get some kind of anchor out there, some kind of development out there. the council had appointed a few new people to the Economic Development Corporation, and one of them was a gentleman named Joe Wilburn, who had run for mayor previously against my predecessor, and the chief argument of that election was, this car wash that he wanted to open and that the city council wouldn't approve, which I think is your car wash comment from earlier is referencing that. So while we're having this discussion, we were kind of at a point where we're ready to pull the trigger on this. And there were some other I'm not going to bore everybody with like policy wonk kind of stuff, but there were some reasons we needed to take action then, because it might have limited the ability of the city to develop that in a free way later, in a way that we wanted with that latitude. And so he was against the economic development deal, and he was trying to tank it at the end. And he was talking to people outside of meetings, and which you're really not supposed to do. You're not supposed to have quorum discussions. And there was increasing concern among staff that was coming to me that he was negotiating in a way that wasn't above board. Years before he had tried to buy that piece of property himself, this board member, he kept trying to get a particular business to open up a restaurant there, and he mentioned this during his discussions over the property, that he really wanted this place to open, and he wanted to peel off the most valuable piece of the property for this guy's restaurant. Well, the developer we were working with said, I don't want to do that. That's the most valuable piece of the property. I don't want to have to set that aside, and it would probably make me not do this if y'all did that. And it was going to blow up the whole deal. And so we'd had this big meeting, and we did it to where we didn't have a quorum. It was like myself and some members of the EDC, and we had this agreement. We all agreed we were going to stay out of everything. And so the next day, the developer meets with this guy's friend who owns the restaurant. They don't immediately come to terms, but they agree to keep talking. But since they don't sign the contract, this gentleman on the EDC calls the developer and tells him, if you don't sign a contract today, this deal will not go through. And this is according to the developer. So at that point, he's not doing what we said. We said we're going to stay out of it. There was reason to believe he had been violating the Open Meetings Act, that he'd been talking about this with a quorum of the board members outside the council meetings. He had threatened this guy, and so I end up writing up a complaint, sending it to the district attorney's office.
Oh, wow.
I wasn't public about the specifics of it. I just said that it was I filed a criminal complaint today. It alleges there was some, what I'm being told by staff is misconduct on the EDC. So I do that. A few weeks go by, and city council doesn't act on it too much, except to kick other members. They want to kick off another member of the board who had nothing to do with any of it.
On the board of the EDC?
Yeah. Okay. And so that kind of was my limit, that I said, I filed this complaint. I showed it to council. They looked at it, and their response was to kick off somebody else potentially that wasn't involved. So at that point, I publicly said, here's what the complaint was about. And I made it public, and I said who it was. Well, this gentleman, he has some money, and he didn't care for that too much. So end of December, I start getting wind that Wayne Dolcefino, the former ABC 13 investigative reporter who now gets paid to put out hit pieces on people, was doing public record requests. And so it turns out, and I don't know this as a matter of 100% certainty, but I have every reason to believe that this gentleman, Mr. Wilburn, paid Dolcefino to begin to run hit pieces on me in the administration of the city. And so he starts running these pieces, and that's really gone on for about 2 years. I've heard rumors that this gentleman paid him as much as $60,000 for a series of a few videos.
And he works for a TV station?
Not anymore. So he used to work for ABC 13, and there's a lot of dispute about exactly what led to his separation from there, and that I don't know anything about. But so he didn't work there for a while, and now he runs he sort of says he's a journalist, but then he says it's a consulting company. I've heard him described as a social media consultant. I don't know how you want to put it, but at the end of the day, he gets paid by people, and then he makes a slam piece and trashes somebody, and so it's kind of the pay for play.
How does he get, what sort of platforms? How does he sort of...
Social media, YouTube, Facebook, that sort of thing. So he gets paid, and he puts these videos up and calls people names and puts cartoon characters in there, and, it's essentially propaganda. And he says, well, I'm a journalist, but, I doubt that his clients would continue to pay him if they didn't say what he wanted. And notably, he won't ever say who exactly is paying him. He doesn't ever say that and won't say that.
So let me paraphrase to see if I understand what the story is. So there was somebody in the EDC. What was his name?
Joe Wilburn was the gentleman's name.
Joe, is he still serving on there?
No.
Okay. And he was, you believe, improperly contacting these.
I had been told by the EDC director at the time, other members of staff, some of the other board members, and then when we told the city attorney what was going on, he said that, yeah, there seems to be a problem. So I didn't have like firsthand direct, like I didn't witness him doing that because he's not going to do it in front of me. But I had multiple staff members coming to me saying that something seemed wrong.
So he's sort of going off on his own, trying to influence developers for some type of deal that would benefit him.
Potentially. And that was what made it, I think, kind of pushed it to making the complaint, because there was too much past history of his interest in this property, steering it toward a preferred person. You know, the way these things are supposed to work is on these boards, you're a policymaker, but you're not really supposed to be out doing the negotiation. That's the job of the EDC director. Now, I mean, they might involve you in that if that's helpful for some reason. But like, for instance, if you're on a board and you have a friend or somebody approaches you about a deal, what you're supposed to do is say, that's great. Hey, you need to talk to the EDC director because that's the person on staff that does this stuff. I'm not supposed to be negotiating contracts as an appointed board member. It's not your role. And we were having way too much board interaction into the specifics of how all this was going down. Your role is really EDC director brings you a deal. If you don't like the deal, then you tell him, I don't like this, this, and this as a body, right? Not individual people running around outside of meetings doing this stuff. That's literally not supposed to, like, it's literally illegal if you've got a quorum of people running around outside the meetings doing this stuff. And that was what had allegedly had gone on, is in the concern that staff had. That you were doing this. And then I think knowing that, man, you tried to buy this property before, man, you're trying to steer this to some friend of yours, and you start saying, this is not, you seem conflicted on this, and, and it's concerning.
It's an appearance of impropriety. It's conflict of interest there. Okay, so then somebody starts running hit pieces. Like what kind of hit pieces?
So what they tried to say was that he turned this whole deal and said that really what was going on was that I was trying to have a preferential deal for my employer at College of the Mainland, that I was somehow going to profit from this. Now, now you work for a college. I don't really think it works that way. They don't pay us extra money for stuff like that is not how that works. Because there had been some interest, very surface level interest, that maybe the college would open a building up on this property. That ended up not happening. I mean, that never really left the womb much. There were some discussions, and the numbers didn't work between the college and the developer, and so the developer didn't want to go with that. So we said, fine, we'll move on with it.
So one of the stories sort of alleged that you were sort of working for COM.
I was, right. Now, what's interesting about that, too, is that one of the claims they made was that this development's going to have a parking garage on it because we received a workforce grant from the government to open a parking garage. And so one of the allegations he made in the videos was that I looked him in the face and said, the parking for the college will be free. And it was this allegation I was going to give free parking. I did tell him that. And the reason I told him that is because the terms of the grant say that all of the parking is free for everybody. And so I had told him, yeah, everybody gets free parking. Yes, the college would get free parking too. And so this is kind of how this guy operates, right? He runs these videos and he takes like the half-truth and he puts it out there and manipulates things like this.
Now,
after that, a friend got me a T-shirt that said free parking on it, like the space from Monopoly. And so they had it for me after the video went out.
Nice.
That was the allegation, was that I was trying to, help benefit my employer. I remember when one of the journalists that wrote in the paper called me she couldn't get the accusation out of her mouth without laughing. Like, she's telling me, he's saying that you're trying to benefit the college somehow. This is a conflict, and she's laughing because it.
Well, I'm even confused as how would that benefit COM? Because COM's is there like a branch in
I
COM?
guess that I was going to give them somehow some sweetheart deal, and they were going to get this free parking from a grant that says everybody has to get free parking, and it doesn't make a lot of sense. It basically was, well, you work at COM, well, maybe they'll open a building, so that means you're dirty.
Okay.
Not me. Not me. It's you that's dirty. See, that's why you filed a complaint to distract from you. And so we kind of end up with this second grade. You know, it's like if you know a student's about to tell on you, like your friend, someone in your class about to tell on you, so you go tell the teacher first. That's sort of the tactic he was taking. Was, well, I'll just say that you're the crooked one, not me.
Okay.
And so that's the tactic that he took.
Oh, man.
And so I don't have tens of thousands of dollars to blow to do that. So, so this narrative begins, and it continues and grows in new ways as the years go on. Now, so that was really, I would say, that's really the start. Is when I filed that complaint with the district attorney's office. That was probably, unknowns to me, that was going to start a long chain in motion that would get really ugly.
Oh, wow. Okay. You know, I was just about to say that not that anybody should be doing hit pieces, but I would think that you could probably find a bunch of teenagers who are savvy enough to run hit pieces on people. Like, if you looked around and wanted to run hit pieces, you could probably go on Fiverr or something to find like pretty budget people who will just do the most cursory research and then just slam somebody and then just post it on.
It's not difficult. You just cherry pick and take half truths and say stuff, and then you say, well, I'm a journalist, so the First Amendment says I can report this. It's saying these things.
Yeah.
Now, he's been in the game long enough to be very careful about not crossing into
legal.
what he thinks he get prosecuted or sued for libel or slander.
Yeah, that is tricky.
He skirts that line. But I mean, there were some things in those videos that were like factually untrue in many cases. So but it's so hard to win a libel slander suit anyway. So it's not.
Okay. So what are some other stories here?
So this whole deal is going on for a while.
Now, was there a lot of blowback? Even this COM alleged story. Is there blowback, and like, how do you know? How do you, as mayor, how do you detect if there's blowback and there's a change in sentiment?
So you start seeing stuff on social media, and these posts are being made, and your friends are asking, I saw this video. Now, most of them, because the videos, as you put it, many people's comment to me is the videos don't look good, they're cheaply made, and they don't necessarily believe it. But like anyone, if you want to believe something, right, you're going to believe it. And so if people don't like you, then this is taken as is something to pounce on, right?
No, I do have to admit, I have a friend at the gym, and he doesn't strike me as somebody who's super into politics, but somehow local politics came up, and he heard of this whole COM deal. So yeah, he heard it from somewhere. So he is being sort of hit with these stories, right? So yeah, so you were seeing negative comments on.
So this goes on. This goes on. I end up running for re-election in 2023, and so of course during that election period too, and in that whole year of 2022, there's a series of different things that come out here and there, just alleging all kinds of stuff, and, and it goes on, and so despite all of this, I ended up getting elected in 2023. It was probably a lot closer than it would have been, but there was a lot of money, I think, got spent against me. I suspect some of it not reported, not on the books, but this guy's running these videos. Somebody else took out some billboard about like attacking me and all this stuff.
I think I've seen some billboards around.
But despite this, I ended up winning re-election. So from that standpoint, the election, did it make a difference in that sense? I mean, maybe on the margins, right? It made it a tighter race, but no. I end up winning re-election. Okay. So then, and I'm still convinced to this day that these people pretty much plan to do this the day after I got elected, something like that. There starts being talk about, just a few months after I get elected, about recalling me.
Oh.
So let's have a recall election. Okay. Well, what's the grounds? So what happened, the first reason for the grounds that they laid out was that our audits, our outside audits were behind. So I don't want to get into the weeds here or anything, but you know, cities, local colleges, whatever, they're supposed to have an annual independent audit like we are. When I first got on council in 2019, I remember I sit down at a table and we're having a workshop about the budget, and we hear, oh, the audit's late, and everyone's complaining the audit's always late. And I look around and I said, well, why is it always late? Why don't we get a new audit firm? They didn't really have a good answer. But we had this firm that had been hired before me for like 5 years. They didn't get their work done. They're sitting up there getting nothing done. The audit gets behind, and we end up being, I think, like 2 or 3 audit years behind.
Oh, wow.
And we're wrangling with this auditor for this audit firm. They're not getting their work done, so they decide that the grounds for the recall is going to be that I am not financially responsible, and among other things, that the audits aren't there. So this needs to get done. Okay, well, should this city have made sure the audits got done? Yes, they should have been done on time. However, is that evidence that you're stealing money? No. And furthermore, as you asked earlier about what are the powers of the mayor, none of the powers of the mayor are to oversee the audits. Everybody. So if you're going to recall me for the audits being late, then you should recall every single person on the city council, because we all could have fired the firm or whatever, which is what we end up doing. We end up firing the firm, hiring a new one, and lo and behold, they are like pumping the audits out in short order, right? Very, very quickly. The interesting part was the people on the recall committee, I believe 3 of them were former council members who actually hired the firm that didn't do any work and complained about it and how it had always been late, and they never took action to get rid of the firm. But then they file a recall petition and say, oh, well, you're not getting the audits done. And so I remember saying, like, well, y'all hired these people that aren't doing their work. And we're the ones that fired them. We're the ones that brought in new people to fix it. And but they're accusing us of a problem that I would argue reasonably they played a role in, right?
Now, was anyone, because I would imagine that being behind on audits would create this black box where anyone can claim that there's going to be a mismanagement of money.
Sure.
And there's no way to disprove it because there's no audit. Was there any allegations of that?
Oh, there was all kinds of stuff you'd hear about mismanagement and just wild stories and things. But then as the audits have come in and been caught up as of late, there have been no adverse findings that the auditors have said, nope, there's nothing untoward going on here. It's all come back clean. I mean, so it's, as you say, I think it just provides convenient cover to say, well, they're not doing an audit. It must be intentional. What are they hiding? Nothing. I mean, it's just not. There's been no credible evidence money has been stolen or misappropriated or anything like that. But they kind of use that vacuum to say this. So they start a recall petition in December-ish, late November of 2023. I think the first hit mailer went out less than 6 months after I'd been reelected. And so immediately I should be recalled. They're saying this stuff. And so they hire this company, and they bring these people in from out of town who are telling people, and people are sending me videos where these people are coming to their door saying, nope, I don't know anything about any of this. I'm from Mississippi. Would you sign this petition? They're just bringing people in. A video got sent to me of a woman being told by one of these people, now signing this petition doesn't mean you want to get rid of the mayor. But the top of the petition literally says, we demand his removal. I mean, but they're like lying to people, saying all kinds of stuff. So they end up getting the requisite amount of signatures, but they basically fail to properly notarize all the documents. So the city attorney says, no, this is not valid, and it gets thrown out. And they complain that I'm getting the city to block the whatever, and all this goes on. And the city council ends up upholding the insufficiency of the deal earlier this year, and so they say no. One of the issues that surfaces right as this recall starts involves an apartment complex in Dickinson that we closed down.
Oh, what street is that on?
It's on 406 Dietz. It's an apartment complex called Creekside Apartments.
Yeah.
It was really interesting. We had city staff, and they allowed us. We asked permission, and the management on site let us. We were responding to complaints from residents of like mold and kind of your classic slum stuff, mold, sewage coming out. So think rundown, ratty apartment, and the residents are complaining about this stuff. So we end up having a lot of staff down, building a case, taking pictures of all kinds of problems. and this is going on for months. They're documenting all of this for months. So we end up taking action in the winter of 2022 to close down the apartment. And so initially the ownership, and they end up on these Wayne Dolcefino videos accusing us of sabotage and saying all this kind of stuff. One of the claims was that everything was fine, they say, that the state of Texas said that they could do work and that we were blocking them. What had happened was they had a boiler that was leaking gas in the winter.
Oh, wow.
And so our city inspector, our staff said, you cannot, we're shutting this down. You can't use the boiler. So they wanted to hook up a new boiler. Well, the boiler had the serial numbers filed off. Which there's usually never a good reason you file the serial number off of something. Like when you file a serial number off of a gun, it usually means you're about to do something you shouldn't be doing. So there's this suspicious boiler. And so they I think it was ABC 13, they told them, well, the state of Texas said that we could set this up, but the city won't let us. And I remember there's a line where the Channel 13 says, well, we called the Texas Department of License and Registration, and they said, absolutely not. We did not say that, and they cannot set that boiler up. Like, that is untrue completely. And so this was the kind of stuff that they were playing, the kind of games they were playing. They end up totally changing course, even after being in a Wayne Dolcefino video where they took them to like the model apartment and said, look how nice these apartments are. See, everything's really cool. Meanwhile, the residents are calling us, constantly complaining about this. One woman would call me and she was coughing the whole time. And she's talking about mold and having respiratory problems. And you see this and you're like, golly, this is bad, right? This is like really people's health. So
what's supposed to be what are they trying to say your motivation is? Like, there's this apartment complex that it's kind of terrible. And then what are they alleging on your part?
This one ends up becoming that the city had some designs to that piece of property and we wanted to bulldoze it and build something else there. And so we were kicking these poor people out of their...
On false pretenses.
Out of their... It's false, and it was, Christmas, my God, how could we do this? This was sort of the allegation that they had laid out. However, the ownership ends up getting new attorneys, and my guess is the attorneys told them, you really don't have a case. You should make peace with the city. So we end up saying, all right, we'll stay a condemnation order, but people can't live there. And they dealt with this constructively, and we got the residents out. I think it was by mid-January of 23 or so. We had, the place was finally empty. Wow. And we were supposed to work with them to do some kind of redevelopment or whatever, and we said fine. So we worked on that some, and it just really didn't go anywhere. After the election was over, they all of a sudden started appearing in Wayne Dolcefino videos again, saying that the city is the devil and we've done all these things and how we always plan to shut the place down. And then they end up hiring Tony Busby to sue us.
Oh, wow.
Interestingly, the attorney at Busby's firm that handled the case was a gentleman named Anthony Dolcefino. Who, yes, is related to Wayne Dolcefino. And so you have him covering this story as a journalist, and then he uncovers all of this corruption, and then his son ends up being the one that files the lawsuit against us.
So this is a lawsuit on behalf of the apartment complex?
Apartment owner. Well, they claim they're going to file a lawsuit. Interestingly, they have never, ever filed a lawsuit, but they continue to threaten to do so and appear in videos, and they would ramp up their threats like during recall petitions. So they were clearly, in my opinion, trying to leverage themselves into some political process. Like if they could get me thrown out, that the city would let this reopen, which I don't think is the case. I think council pretty much all agreed that this place was a dump and it should have been shut down. Yeah. So they're playing into this recall, and the recall petition is saying we're facing pending litigation that never materialized. The interesting part was that as this is going on with this, they're hiring Tony Busby. We're getting these letters, and I think what is a clear attempt to sort of bully us and say we're bringing in this top tier attorney from downtown Houston, this little city better do what we want. As all this is going on, this is when the Ken Paxton impeachment trial is going on, and I'm as a government professor, I'm obviously interested in this, and I'm covering it, right, and I'm looking at it, and I'm sitting with somebody, and I say, why don't we just, if they can hire Tony Busby, I said, why don't we just go hire like Rusty Hardin? And so we end up doing that.
Who's Rusty Hardin?
Rusty Hardin is this kind of Houston super lawyer. He represented, for instance, in the 90s, the family of the oil billionaire that had married Anna Nicole Brown, or not Anna Nicole Brown, what the Playboy playmate,
Anna Nicole Smith.
Anna Nicole Smith, excuse me, Anna Nicole Smith, and he's very prolific and has been. And anyway, he was the one that the House managers hired to prosecute the impeachment of Ken Paxton. And so he's sort of, attorney royalty in the state.
Yeah.
And he and Busby, I think, and Busby was, of course, who Paxton had hired, among other attorneys. And so I'm just sort of seeing it here on TV in front of me. So I say to myself on a lark, well, why don't we do that? One of the few powers I do have as mayor is to recommend our legal counsel to council. I don't have a lot. That's one of them.
Okay.
So in my prerogative as mayor, I see this and I go, well, why not? So I call Rusty Hardin's office and end up talking to some associate, and they seem interested in this case. And for a brief period of time, we're using them. And so this ends up being a thing like, whoa, you've got these super lawyers. So you've got Tony Busby and you've got Rusty Hardin, and there's this, whatever. And
this is over the apartment complex.
Over the apartment complex, right?
Okay.
Mostly. And so we hire them and all of this. So it becomes, so this adds this other, outsized spectacle to this whole, what is really a pretty simple case of a city closing down a rundown apartment. I mean, so, we end up hiring them, and as I noted, to this day, they have filed no litigation. They were alleging that the city had improperly shut them down and had done all this damage, but they have never, ever, ever once filed a lawsuit. And I'm pretty sure the reason for that is that they know that they're not going to win in court. We had ample reason to do this. So this element ends up going on too, and it becomes part of this whole harassment. But I'm not even really to the good part yet.
Oh,
this
gosh.
Is not,
no, that's fine, because I do want to hear it.
I told you before we started, I said I might have a two-parter for you on this. I don't know.
I do know that I'm not going to be able to pick up my kid, but I could. It might have to be a two-parter. Wow, this is really. Maybe. Could you, how bad does it get?
It gets pretty bad. We're going to end up getting into police allegations of police cover-ups, and
all right, this is good then. I want to keep it I want to do a two-parter.
Okay,
then.
well,
all right, so that's quite an interesting trajectory from city council to all the way through to, what did we have, a COVID death?
So we had a COVID death. We had national newspapers interviewing this little town. We've got $1,500 an hour attorneys getting involved over a little town of 20,000 people.
Okay, this is good then. So we're gonna have to do part 2. Come in very soon. We'll work it out. So in the meanwhile, thank you for coming on, and we'll do this again.
All right.